In this video, we will primarily examine the Canadian offensive attack from the World Sixes Championship Final in 2022, also looking at some of the tendencies of Team USA. An offensive set is a settled, even-strength situation involving 5 players on the field. It's initiated by a set of principles, rules, or guidelines for players to follow in order to add structure and to make things flow. Generally speaking, Canada used a freelance offense with a few set plays mixed in early and late in quarters. Although to freelance literally means to work for yourself with no allegiance to anyone, in order for this offense to be effective, all players on the field were involved, and there were no spectators. In a freelance offense, there should be options to choose from, along with freedom to use individual intuitiveness, all in an effort to exploit weaknesses and break down the opponent's style of defensive play. Offensive players need to force the defense to respond to their actions, thereby creating separation for themselves and time and space for teammates. Superior team offense promotes swinging the ball, plenty of motion, pick and rolls, and pick and pops. In other words, pass, pick, pop, roll, replace, cut, and shoot, as Casey Powell used to say. Offensive players need to spread the defense by staying wide while also adjusting their position to help create open passing lanes. Always be cycling, Team Canada Sixes General Manager Eddie Como used to say, referring to players continuously making meaningful and purposeful movement both on ball and off ball. Sometimes a predetermined set of actions can be executed by an offense in a settled situation, whether even strength or on the power play, developed and practiced to create an advantage or opportunity during the game. These are otherwise known as set plays or focus plays. Usually teams will try a set play on offense after a timeout, a dead ball, or in the first possession of a period or a quarter, which was often the case for Canada in their lopsided 23-9 victory over the USA in this game. The offensive set that Canada seemed to continue to exploit was an empty crease setup, primarily on the weak side, or the 2-player side, and sometimes on the strong side, or 3-player side, with an east-west pick-and-roll attempt at the shooter position. These first 2 clips were analyzed extensively in the Sixes defense video, but the main thing to notice in this and all preceding clips, which are the order in which they appear in the game, is that both the American defenders are continuously jumping out at the ball on east-west picks and leaving the roller wide open behind them. If you watch the Super Sixes tournament the year prior, this setup seemed to get used a few times within the freelance offense, but it seemed to generate a great opportunity the majority of the time. It's obvious that the empty crease setup was a big part of the Canadian game plan. The third clip shows an empty crease setup on the strong side, with one player stationed behind the net in order to create space for the other 2. Here the American defender number 1, Kirst, is inviting Teat number 51 top side instead of denying it, which could have negated the whole situation. Instead, the low defender number 25, Goodrich, fires out anticipating a switch that wasn't there, leaving number 22, Byrne, the leading scorer at the tournament, wide open for a mid-range bomb. Here it is again with Dane Smith, number 92, sweeping over top of an east-west pick from number 14, Berg, who is wide open on the roll and makes no mistake with the short side fake and a crease dive, finishing low on the far side of American goalie Jack Kelly, who had no chance. The last clip shows what happens when you don't fire out, with an easy mid-range bounce shot from Smith coming over top the pick, which is option number 1 in any pick-and-roll situation. If you rewatch the last few clips, you will also realize that number 1 or 25 were involved in the last 5 breakdowns in this situation, which makes you realize that Canada was likely purposefully exploiting these weak defenders in the 2-player game when they got the opportunity.
We got more to give! We got ball! We got ball! That time, right?
The other set play that Canada repeatedly went to was the crease vacate or crease clear out play, primarily on the strong side, timed with a hard run underneath by the ball carrier. Watch closely how as soon as number 28 Bowring on Canada touches the low crease position, he vacates into the middle, triggering the high ball carrier number 51 Teat to take a hard run underneath. Notice also that Teat had the east-west pick option from number 55 Cole, which may have also gotten Teat open over top, adding even further apprehension to the decision-making process of the American defenders. The same group of players go right back to the same play on their very next shift. They start in an empty creased east-west setup for the righties, which actually allows number 92 Smith to get topside. However, he elects to swing the ball to the lefties, and this time Bowering and Cole both clear out as soon as Teat receives the ball. Number 26 Schreiber actually has good topside position at first, but the two low defenders abandon him without him knowing, and it leads to an uncontested run underneath with a crippler shot 5-hole on the goalie. As I mentioned repeatedly in the Sixes defense video, somebody needs to tell Schreiber he's alone so he can angle his feet and deny the underneath lane, otherwise make the high-low switch. Here it is with the righties. Peterson, number 42, is already nice and wide at the point position, standing slightly on his wrong side. McIntosh, number 24, clears out from the crease for Smith, and if you follow him, he takes a loop around Peterson's defender and then cuts hard to the net, getting left wide open, but robbed by Jack Kelly in tight. Finally, you have two consecutive hard underneath cuts in the third quarter. The first one, Cole can see that he has a straight-up ISO situation at the crease with no other American defenders around to help. The other two Canadian lefties stay clear in recognizing the opportunity, with Cole ultimately taking a jab step to the top side and swimming the much smaller defender, taking him hard underneath into the rack with full extension on the crease dive. Same thing for number 77 Courier on the very next possession. Teat gives him a little pick and pop action off of the up pick, and Courier takes the low defender hard underneath for the G-note. It's an invitation to go underneath when the defenders are checking this far out, aka over-checking, as well as not denying the underneath lane. It's always worth trying your check underneath within a freelance offense or any time they aren't playing with proper defensive positioning and footwork. Many good looks were created during this game in this fashion, including the first possession of the game for the Americans, which makes me wonder why they never continued to go back to the well as the game went on. Look at all of the room there is at the crease for Challen Rogers to try the underneath on the strong side on this one. This defender needs to stay tighter and not check so far out. Nonetheless, Rogers attracts attention in the form of an adjacent slide, easily hitting the adjacent pass that leads to a wide open opportunity in front. Here you have the exact same setup on the very next shift from the same group. Hard underneath, curl out, two passes, and then in the net. That's the thing about offense. If it's working, keep going to it, and you saw that pattern from the Canadians in this game. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, on any given offensive set, teams usually have guidelines or rules for players to follow in order to add structure and make things flow. For the Americans, their go-to play was the pass around the horn, meaning around the net from one shooter to the other, then attacking the net. I'm not sure why they kept going back to it because it never worked, not once. It was literally wasted movement and precious time. In fact, it led to two fast breaks the other way, one for a goal, as you can see. The other set play the Americans seemed to do was the alley dodge, which I broke down extensively in our Sixes Box on a Field blog. And wrapping up on 5-on-5, I will not even acknowledge the alley dodge as a fundamental form of offense that should be played in Sixes. Further, it should be noted that goals scored in transition are not covered in this video. There's not much to report on in terms of set plays on the power play. It was a very basic 3-on-2 across the top for the most part, with the Canadians liking the quality of the looks they were getting from a relatively stationary USA box zone defense that they were playing. They were pinching very hard on the top on Teat, and he was just playing games with them. Smith took his first couple open shots as a result of all the attention Teat was getting, both of which were actually great saves by the American goalie. They used the same setup with Teat again later at the beginning of the third quarter on the power play, which is a rule I don't like and will discuss in my rule suggestion video. But this time, giving one fake pass and shooting a short side bouncer. Teat also showed his backhand pass from the top in this situation at the Super Sixes tournament a year earlier, where Canada again just kept it simple and had similar results. In this game, Canada was 3 for 4 or 75% on the power play, and the USA was 1 for 4 at 25%. The biggest difference was the rotating diamond that Canada would throw out, applying pressure on the shooters and the point. The only available option was temporarily at the crease, which is where the Americans got their lone goal. Special teams as a whole remains a great area of exploration still to be seen in the evolution of the Sixes game. Looking through the stats and analyzing all of the possessions from the championship game, there was a big feeling out process at the beginning of the first quarter, with lots of saves and turnovers and a few goals sprinkled in. It's also critical to acknowledge how many times the USA missed the net in this game at 12 versus Canada's 3. However, as I mentioned in the last blog on defense, Canada simply got much higher quality shots throughout the course of this game. Here you have a shot chart with the Canadians represented with red X's, American with black X's, goals with the green ball, saves with the white ball, and shots that missed the net with no ball. As you can see, not many of the American shots were in the middle, and they also settled for shots from much further out than the Canadians. Almost half of the Canadian goals came from directly in front of the net. This was due to far superior pick and roll play, as I have now broken down at length, also world-class shooting and finishing in front by the Canadians, who are used to scoring on much smaller nets with much bigger goalies. Scoring goals requires fakes, both subtle body fakes and overt stick fakes, with changes in shot angle and elevation, both horizontal and vertical, changes in shot nature or style, for instance set shot versus shots on the run versus quick sticks, as well as release points, overhand, sidearm, underhand, crippler, backhand, all within the variety of different game scenarios. This chart breaks it down. Based on the stats between both teams, an overhand short side bounce shot was the most likely shot to go in, likely a 3/4 release in that scenario. A close second would be a high sidearm shot to the far side top corner, although the Americans scored no sidearm goals at all, while the Canadians had just as many sidearm goals as they had overhand. As we roll the goal montage in the background for you, with every goal in sequential order as they appeared in the game, let's think about what we've learned here. In summary, Canada played a principles-based freelance offense with set plays approximately 50% of the time. If the set play didn't present a quality shot, they just continued to work the ball around with meaningful motion and purposeful picks. The pick and roll game was the key to creating separation and 2-on-1s in the offensive zone, primarily on ball, but in some cases off ball. Canada had 2 set plays, the crease vacate and the empty crease east-west pick, both of which were geared towards the best attributes of their players. After that, it was just trust your instincts and take what they give you. The Americans, on the other hand, had guys operating on their wrong side all over the place, which is a big mistake when the 2-player game was what was getting guys open in the middle for shots. The picks set by the Americans were rarely east-west, seemingly always north-south. When they were set east-west, I was still seeing them go underneath, i.e. not using the pick properly, which is a mistake. You should be using the picks 90% of the time. On a north-south pick, you go underneath. On an east-west pick, you go top side. That's just the way it is. Saying that, it's pretty hard to play 2-man game when you only have 2 lefties on your whole roster. This is also a problem in American field lacrosse from what I know. If you look back at our first Sixes blog showing the player stats from the tournament, it's quite clear that the USA's entire offense was coming from their righties. Perhaps the lefties were fatigued. They did have the most turnovers, least assists, and worst shooting percentage, which is surprising because number 13 Gutterding lit it up at the Super Sixes tournament the year prior. When guys get tired late in quarters, there is little time to settle into your offense. You need to look for a great shot right off the bat on most possessions, and Canada was 1 or 2 passes and attack, 1 swing pass and re-attack. Lastly, you won't see anyone celebrating any goals out here, as it's immediately off the field or hard back to defense.